History is full of people who did things that rattle us to the core. Dangerous people who made us rethink if there is sanity left in the world. One of such people is Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, who terrorized people of California on a spree that went on for 2 years, including murder, torture, and rape of 25 victims, which included 12 gruesome murders. He fell below the line of sanity when he started to hang out with his cousin, Miguel, who was a Special Forces Vietnam War veteran. He lived in an abusive household to escape his violent father, who spent a lot of time with his elder cousin. Miguel was not much of a better influence on him. When he was deputied in Vietnam, Miguel had taken evidence of his horrific actions as proof. He had raped, tortured, and even decapitated several women. He used to share the photographs of his satanic actions with young Richard, which deepened his interest and even molded him into becoming a Satanist and an addict years later. To worsen his impact on his life, Miguel had little Richard present at the time when he shot his wife in the face, so close in fact that blood splattered on his face. Richard was just 13 years old when this happened. The shooting incident started a transformation of little Richard from an abused boy who was often bullied both in and out of his home to a young man who feared nothing, not even taking someone's life in cold blood. Living the life that he had witnessed, he developed an interest in Satanism and slipped onto hard drugs, which gave his life an even darker turn. He even assumed that he could get away with his actions when his cousin pleaded not guilty for the murder of his wife for insanity reasons and spent 4 years in a mental hospital before he was released. Living the life that he had been exposed to since the beginning of his adulthood, he developed a strange obsession for inflicting violence on women and gained a thrill from the sexual acts that often involved the killing of his victims at the end. His habits, addictions, and inhuman ways of dealing with women got him into trouble more often, especially when he moved to Los Angeles. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, his crimes were small theft and drugs possession. However, it was not long before he found pleasure in worse, unspeakable crimes. His sinister career started in June of 1984 when he broke into a house, raped the 79-year-old Jeannie Vincow, and murdered her by slashing her throat so deep her head was almost detached from her body. When her body was found, it had several stab wounds. By the February of next year, the police had 2 more murders at their hand. He took the lives of 2 little girls in separate incidents. The first one was a 6-year-old girl who he abducted near her school bus stop and carried away in a laundry bag. Evidence showed that she was brutally raped. Just 2 weeks later, after the 6-year-old was found, a 9-year-old girl was kidnapped from her bedroom in Monterey Park, raped, and dumped in Elysian Park. At first, the police didn't link the 2 cases to one suspect or gave the title of serial killer who rapes his victims before dumping them. Richard moved soon from molestation to murder. He shot to death 34-year-old Daily Okazaki in her condo and wounded her roommate, Hernandez. She was just lucky since the bullet reflected from the keys that she held in her hands that she lifted to protect herself. As police arrived at the scene, it was assumed that hell that broke on these 2 women, but the Night Stalker had other plans. Within an hour of the first murder, he bounced back in the Monterey Park in search of another victim. Sadly, poor Tsai Lianyu, a 30-year-old woman, was in her car whom he grabbed by the arm, dragged on the road, shot a few times, and fled, leaving her to die. She suffered 1,000 times more than anyone can imagine, and she was still breathing when police found her, but she took her last breath before the ambulance could arrive. 10 days later, Ramirez shot a 64-year-old man, Vincent Zazara, and his 44-year-old wife, Maxiane. Killing by shooting was not the only horrifying detail of the murder. He stabbed Maxiane several times and left a T mark carved on her breasts and gouged out her eyes. Ramirez left footprints in the flower beds, which police photographed, and matched to those found in the previous sites and figured they had a serial killer on the loose. 2 months later, after the Zazara couple was killed, Ramirez inflicted the unspeakable in Melville Keller, who was 83 years old at the time of death, and her 80-year-old disabled sister, Blanc, beating her to death with a hammer. Blanc survived the attack. On the very next day, Ruth Wilson, a 41-year-old woman, was bound, raped, and sodomized by him. In the next 2 months, 3 more women were killed, and many others became victim to his wrath. He was finally identified driving his orange Toyota station wagon by a teenager. Police was able to profile and find a long tab of past arrests. 2 days later, he was found beaten by an angry mob who identified them by the mugshots that were prints and placed on every newspaper. On September 1989, he was convicted for 13 murders, 11 sexual assaults, burglaries, and robberies, and sentenced to death by gas chambers. The trial was the longest in American history, including 1,600 jurors and 100 witnesses. While he was waiting on death row, he died a natural death in prison due to liver failure and was pronounced dead on his arrival to the hospital. May he rot in hell. Thanks again for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to be notified of our next videos, and I'll see you in the next one.